Welcome back. Happy New Year. Season 3 of the Backpick Podcast here. We've got another great group of guests this season to really help you guys continue to get better. Today we start in the realm of softball with Erika Piancastelli. Erika plays professionally in Japan as well as Athletes Unlimited in the summertime. She was an All-American at McNeese State. She was an Olympian for Team Italy in 2020. A hell of a resume, and she dug deep into a lot of great catchy stuff. I think you're really going to enjoy it. The Backpick Podcast and the Catching Academy are happy to be partnered with All Star Sports, who we think does the best job of taking care of catchers. You can go to their website and use our code CatchingAcademy10 and get 10% off anything site-wide. So start from the beginning. You're born in Italy, and then talk about your trek here to the States and how kind of your softball career evolved here in the United States.
Yeah, so I was born in Modena, Italy. Both my parents, my dad played baseball at the highest level in Italy, and then my mom also played softball. So she went to the 2000 Olympics with the Italian national team, and she was playing all over Italy. So from the moment I was born, I guess it was really in my blood, but they never forced it on me. At the age of 5, my dad got a job offer to move to California. It was one of his biggest dreams. And it was supposed to be just kind of like a test it out for 5 years and then head back to Italy. 5 years turned into 20 years, and my career kind of started in the States. I started playing at the age of 7, and my parents were my first coaches. And then I just loved it from the first moment I started playing. I loved what it was, and I really wanted to follow my mom's footsteps because she always talked to me about her experience in the Olympics. And at the age of 12, I wanted to get more competitive, so I started playing travel ball. And that's when, in the travel ball scene, is when I got my scholarship to go to McNeese State. Never knew what McNeese State was, where it was, who they were. Just kind of, the offer was really good, and I went on my visit, and I loved how small of a school it was, and the program and the coaches, and so I was like, why not? At this point, I still didn't really understand how far softball could take me. I just was loving it. I was having fun, so I wanted to play. In college, though, after my freshman year, I think is when it started to click. I started to really understand my body. I started to understand the sport, and I started to understand the opportunities that I would have at the next level if I continued to really work hard at it. And so after college, broke some records at McNeese, was an All-American for 2 years. And then I got drafted to go play for the Scrapyard Fast Pitch, which was a independent team at the time in 2018. They didn't last long. I think the team ended in 2019. And then in 2020, AU started. So I dedicated my pro career to AU from year one. I also started playing on the Italian national team in 2014 on the junior team. And then in 2015, I was on the senior team. I became captain in 2017. And then I was captain at the Olympics in 2021, and then now we changed captains, but I still currently play for the Italian national team. I started playing in Japan after the Olympics, so in 2022, they saw me at the Olympics, and that's when I got my offer to go play in Japan. And that was always a big dream of mine. Once I went to Japan for the first time in the World Cup in 2018, I fell in love with Japan, and I was like, I'd love to play here. I know it's the highest level, but I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how to reach out to somebody or how that process worked. And then when I went back for the Olympics and I performed the way I did, then I just got, I was at AU at the time, and I got an email saying if I could hop on a Zoom with a Japanese team. And so that was how that side of my career started. I'm now 4 years in Japan. This is about to be my 4th season. And this is going to be my 6th season with AU, currently now AUSL. So yeah, I'm nonstop from April to November, and then I just keep doing it every year.
I love it. I'm going to backtrack to when you were talking about you're in high school, because you said something really important. You said you started to understand your body. And I think that's an important piece that we get a lot of our younger athletes, really starting to get that feel for their body and how they move. Go a little bit in depth on what you mean by saying you understood your body a little bit more.
I'm a very feel type player. I have to feel the movement. If someone's teaching me something, a new skill, I have to really feel the movement a couple of times before I start to understand it. And in being a feel type athlete, understanding my body was super, super important. So just understanding what my body can do, what movements maybe were my strongest and what movements were my weakest, and how to make the weak side stronger. I with the type of swing that I have as well, it's a big movement piece in my swing. And so understanding how can I have the most what movement in my body will I have the most power? How can I get all the power that I have, and how can I translate it when I make contact? And so just understanding, and this came with weightlifting, and it came with, doing all the type of exercises in the gym, is really understanding how your body moves, what it means when this feels like, if I'm sore, is it sore or am I injured? Like, kind of understanding those two differences, understanding what feels good in the gym and what doesn't. And I think the biggest piece is starting weightlifting at the age that I did, and starting movements like that at the age that I did, because that really started to get me more power. And it really started to make me understand, again, how my body works in that space and how I can maximize my power. And then when I got to college, I was able to quickly understand and translate it, rather than having to go through a whole process of, this is how you squat, this is how you lunge, and doing those movements correctly, and kind of wasting the first couple of years in college.
Oh, for sure. I love that. How much of that did you apply to your defense? Obviously, you're talking a lot about your swing and those movements. Talk a little bit about how that applied to you behind the plate.
Yeah, behind the plate, I think same thing. Being flexible, I think what has taken me so far in my career is my flexibility and my mobility. And that's something that, in learning your body, you understand what your body needs, what stretches it needs, what positions feel good, like I said. And in having really good ankle mobility and hip flexibility, I can get in a very low squat without having to think twice. Like, that's just natural to me. And so being able to understand movements from that position, and, knock on wood, but in my whole career so far, I have had zero knee injuries. I've had zero knee pain as a catcher. And people always ask me, like, how do your knees still not hurt? Like, you've been catching for so long. And it's like, that's just what happens when you take care of your body, and when you start to understand what movement feels good and what doesn't. Because a lot of catchers I see, they'll be in a position that just doesn't look good, and it doesn't, and I can tell that they're in pain, and they're not understanding why. That they were just told that that's what position they need to be in. But in understanding your body, you can adjust your stance and maybe be unique with it, but you can have your own stance that allows you to then maximize your power behind the plate, and allows you to be quick when you have to throw to second or throw to bases or block, whatever it is you have to do. But that all comes with not only being flexible and mobile, but also the strength in your legs, in your knees, in your core, and just making sure that you're working on kind of like the background muscles that no one really talks about, but the small details that really allow you to keep going in your career, especially in a position like catching that is very, what's the word? It's very just kind of like, I can't think of the word, but
It's physically
it's like
demanding for
physical. It's
sure.
physically
Yeah.
demanding, but it's
Yeah.
like you're in a squat for 7, 9 innings, whatever it is. So it's like, it's very physically demanding and very up and down on your knees and on your legs. And so understanding how to take care of your body through that.
I love it. So uh, let's dive into the catching since you're on that. We're talking about stances and maximizing your stances. And obviously the position's evolving a ton at this point in terms of different stances. And I've watched you on Athletes Unlimited. You kind of vary the stance from time to time. Talk to us a little bit about what stances you're in and what situation kind of depends on which stance you go to.
So when no one's on and it's kind of the beginning of the game, and like I said, you have no runners on, you're more relaxed as a catcher. So I just stay in my normal squat. And what my biggest priority is in that situation is just working for my pitcher, getting those strike calls, and understanding what the zone is for the game. Once I get runners on, I want to be more aware and more agile to be able to then react really fast. So I tend to kind of squat with my butt a little bit elevated and hold kind of like a mid squat as the pitch is coming. Not the whole time, because I don't want to wear my legs out, but as the pitch is coming, I tend to lift up a little bit, and so that I can be ready to drive my knee down if I have to throw or pick somebody off. And then also depending on the pitch, if I know it's a pitch that has a chance to hit the ground like a drop ball or a change up, I'm also in my mid squat just so I can be more agile and be able to block it as fast as possible.
I've seen you use a little bit of your left knee down. How often do you use a knee down stance?
So the knee down is very I don't want to say it's random, but I think it just depends on how comfortable I am with the pitcher and with the movement of their pitches. I do remember specifically doing it with some pitchers that have a backdoor or a curve on the inside part, and I just felt more comfortable to be able to get around the pitch if my knee was down. And so usually I would have my knee down again with no runners on. I felt more comfortable just having my knee down. With runners on, I do tend to just go back to my mid squat stance so I can be faster with throwing. But putting my knee down just allowed me to get lower and allowed me to really work up and around pitches to be able to get those as strikes. And I just felt more comfortable with that. And I tended to feel more comfortable with it on one side of the plate I couldn't do it on both sides of the plate. I don't know if it was just the movement of the pitch, but I felt way more comfortable maybe on like a backdoor or a screwball pitch than it was on maybe a curve or a drop outside. So I think it's just understanding what works for you.
Have you messed around with those stances in other situations? Left knee down. Have you messed around at all with right knee down?
No, I haven't. Because even when I did start putting my left knee down, it was very in the moment. It wasn't something I thought about. It was just like, oh, this feels good. Let me just stay here for a little bit. But I haven't really messed around with it in certain situations. I think with me, it's more of like if it feels right in that situation, or if I feel like I can really get under a pitch, I'll do it. But it's not like I don't plan into it ahead of time and think, oh, with this batter, I can go knee down. It's just isn't something that I've really tried too often. It just kind of happens.
So talk a little bit about the evolution, because you're kind of like right in this evolution of catching. And when you first started catching, probably in college, still was a lot of like the moving and like the sticking. And we've now gotten more to moving the ball to us, so more like bringing the ball to our center instead of taking our center to the ball. Talk a little bit about your evolution with that, because in my somewhat limited experience in softball. Softball seems very protective of their traditions, and don't seem to like, baseball's this game where it's like everybody's constantly trying to figure out what makes us better. How can we get an edge? And softball kind of sticks a little more to tradition. I feel like moving the ball was the first thing where catching was like, okay, we're moving a little bit more and evolving in the position. Talk a little bit about that evolution of receiving.
I'm big on being a quiet receiver. I was always taught that in college is you don't want to move too much behind the plate. You don't want to distract the umpire. I was always told like kind of be a ninja back there, just be very quiet and smooth and meet the ball. And so that was always my approach. And in practicing, I also always in college was taught to keep my glove down at first and then meet the ball. So like working up, especially on drop ball pitchers. So that's just always something that felt comfortable to me. But I started to notice the difference when I started seeing catchers, especially in softball, that moved a lot. And it really bothered me because I was like, you're doing a lot back there to try to get a strike. And then you're confusing the umpire on what is a strike and what isn't a strike, because you're making a ball that's very much a ball. You're trying to make it a strike. And then the umpire is then going to second guess, like, well, was that a strike or was that a ball? And so I get helping your pitcher as much as possible, but you also have to help them by helping the umpire really see what's happening and be confident in what they're calling. And so I'm very much so someone that's very quiet and just I want to meet where the ball is. If anything, as I'm catching it, I'm moving my glove slightly. Like if I have to lift it a little bit or bring it in, I'll do some slight movements, but it's never after the catch. It's usually as I'm catching the ball just to make it more smooth. And that's just something I'm really big on as catching. If I work with people on catching, I try to always tell them, be very silent back there and just kind of put the ball where it's placed and try not to do too much. If it's a ball, it's a ball, throw it back to the pitcher. Don't think about it too much. But if it's a close pitch, you can try to move it. Just make sure that you're not catching and then doing this dramatic bring over the plate type movement. But But yeah, like you said, softball, I think now it's changing a little bit. Well, now you see a lot of different styles, and I think people are now kind of similar to baseball as they're trying to see what works, what can take our team to the next level. Like, how can we get more strikes, more pitches, whatever it is. And so now I think you're seeing a lot of different styles of catching in softball. And I just don't think I don't think we've actually figured out what is the best way. I think it just all depends on the catcher and how they move. But I am big on not everyone being the same. I don't like having one type of catching stance or one type of catching movement and teaching that to everybody. Like I said, feeling your body and understanding what your body does will also help you understand what type of catcher you are and what movements you can do. But going back to the moving and receiving and moving your arm too much, that's just something for me that's like, you don't have to do all of that to get the strike called. I think being quiet and being and like kind of sticking every pitch will make it way more successful for your pitcher.
And we talk about it all the time. Like, our approach is not to make ball strikes. It's to keep strikes, you know? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that goes across all levels, because you have, at the younger levels, you don't have many pitchers with command. You might have pitchers with control, like they can throw it in the strike zone, but we got to make all those look like strikes. And we might be expecting one on the inner half and it ends up on the outer half, and we got to find a way to do that. And then at the higher levels, man, the stuff is really good. I mean, you know, now, like, you're catching pitchers that, I mean, this stuff is firm and it's moving late. And the reality is like, just as hard as it is to hit it, as hard it is for you to catch it, like, it's hard for the umpire to see it and determine what's a ball and a strike, right? And so a lot of times when people see, you know, the movement of the glove back into the zone, or just trying to slightly move it to get it into a good spot, they think we're trying to like fool the umpire. But the reality is, like, pitches on the border are tough. You got to create a path that gets that thing moving back to the center of your body and not have the ball take you away. So what are some drills that you're doing on a regular basis with your receiving to work on that?
The biggest thing for me is just keeping my hand smooth and quiet. So like working on maybe heavy balls, someone tossing me heavy balls, and with no glove, just making sure I'm like receiving it as softly as I can. I never really want to I don't want to attack the ball and just try to be too hard with it. I want to make sure the ball's coming to me and I'm kind of like meeting it and being smooth. That's a good drill to do. And just getting your forearm strong. I think the biggest thing is the stronger your forearm is, the more you can stick pitches. But then when I do catch bullpens, it's more, how can I meet pitches and make sure that if it's an inside pitch, I'm getting it on the inside corner and I'm trying to like meet it and hold it and stick it there and see, am I catching it at the right time? Am I too early? Am I too late? Because like hitting, catching is also about timing and it's about rhythm. You can't be a standstill catcher and then out of nowhere go catch a ball. You have to have sort of like a rhythm with your hand in order to meet the ball and be smooth with it. Just like hitting, you want to have rhythm with your hands before you start your movement. It's all about timing. So making sure you're timing up pitches, switching from maybe off speed to their velo pitches, and understanding like what's the timing there. How can I meet pitches? How does it drop? How does it curve? So really just understanding spin. But I think the biggest drill for me to understand timing is always just having somebody in front of me tossing heavy weighted balls and me just kind of meeting it and sticking it, especially balls that if you can make the tosser throw it in like a drop, it's a drop on a heavy ball. So you really have to have that forearm strength to keep it up and to hold it. So I think that's my favorite drill to do as much as I can. But again, it's all with practice and with experience. So I think the biggest thing that someone could do is catch bullpens. The more bullpens you can catch, the more live pitching you can catch, the more as a catcher you understand spin, you understand location, and you understand what the best way to go around it. So I think a lot of catchers struggle with screwballs. Right-handed catchers with a glove on the left hand having to catch a screwball from a righty. A curve from a lefty. So coming into a righty hitter, it's always tough to grab because the ball's coming into your glove, but you have to also meet it around it. And that's when a lot of thumbs get kind of hurt or broken. And so understanding how can your body get around it without doing too much movement. So like the only way you can practice that is by catching a bullpen or by catching machines. So I think just making sure you're constantly seeing spin and you're constantly seeing in and out and challenging yourself with maybe pitches that you don't feel super comfortable with. Those are the pitches that I would probably attack the most, and then go to the ones that you feel most comfortable with.
Talk about that pitch to the glove side, because that's definitely one that, we all know is the toughest in terms of creating that space to be able to do that. So talk a little bit about that, and kind of just like you're talking about like a drill to focus on it, but what's your kind of overall philosophy on what you're trying to do to make sure you meet it on that path?
So for me, I mean, I've hurt my thumb plenty of times, and we all know how that feels, especially when it's in game and then you also have to go hit after that. It's horrible. But I think for me to really avoid that, because I hated that feeling so much, was practicing my timing with that pitch and almost wanting to get ahead of that pitch and not trying to catch it when it breaks. And so understanding my timing, I might have to be a little bit earlier with that pitch on going out to catch it rather than letting it get to me and getting stuck back here or getting stuck at my chest. And that's when I hurt my thumb. So for me, it was very much a timing thing, and understanding how that ball breaks. Does it break late? Does it break early? Does it break at all? Or am I just kind of getting caught up in it? And so my philosophy is always getting ahead of a glove side pitch. Is like, how can I get ahead of it and get around it and hold it so that I'm catching it in my pocket and not on my palm of the glove. And so that again came with bullpens and came with just working on different timing mechanisms and trying to understand it. When is it too early? When is it too late? And when is it kind of the perfect time for me to put my glove and catch it?
I love it. Talk a little bit about your setup. One thing that for me has been a tough adjustment with girls is they all want to set up later. And I feel like they're almost try to like set up for the catch instead of like getting set to then make the catch. And I don't know if that's like a technique thing that like kind of like an old traditional technique thing of kind of like stepping into the catch, or if it's something in terms of the game of like, obviously we know like people are relaying signs and pitches, and we don't want to set up too early and give anything away. But it makes it very difficult if they're kind of like moving into the catch instead of like really being set. So talk a little bit about how you're getting set up.
Yeah, I know I've seen a couple of coaches teach in the timing. They're also teaching in order to time, you have to move and catch at the same time. So that's what their timing is when they're teaching catching. Um, I'm very much a catcher that I'll move later, as late as I can, but I still want to be able to be set before I catch the ball. So it's how late can I be where I'm still in my location before I have to catch the ball. So I kind of try to push the limit with that. I don't want to move too early. Like you said, people are picking, hitters might be peeking. I don't want to do that, but I think it also depends on the pitchers. Some pitchers, I know in softball, pitchers are they're very particular in what they want from their catchers. And so understanding your pitchers, some pitchers might need you to set up early. Some pitchers might need to see your location first before they start their movement. And then some pitchers are fine with you being extremely late and all they have to do is look up the last second and just see your glove there. So I think understanding when you have to be in a certain position. But for me, it's going into being quiet and smooth. I like to take small steps to my location and then making sure that I'm set so I can like firmly hold the pitch. If I'm moving too late and I'm moving while trying to catch the ball, I realize like I can't, I'm almost like making up for time and doing too much movement or trying to like move too much behind there to get the pitch, or I'll end up catching it bad and the pitch maybe was a strike, but I wasn't there on time to make it a strike. And so the umpire will miss it or call it a ball, and that's on me. So I think just for me, it's how late can I be in order to still be set and catch the pitch, if that makes sense. I don't want to move too early, but I do still want to, again, time it up where based on the pitcher's pitching movement, like I know like if she's going back, that's my time to kind of take my step outside or in. And as she's coming forward, I'm set. Or if she has a different movement where she's kind of quicker to it or moving straight to the catcher, then I have to maybe preset earlier. And another tip that a coach had told me in my career once was sometimes you can preset by just standing up. Like when you're throwing back to the pitcher, you're standing up. If you know that you're about to call outside or you're about to call inside, again, this is if you're calling as a catcher, not if the coaches are calling, because that makes it tougher. But if you're calling as a catcher and you know ahead of time what you're about to call, as you're standing, before you squat back down, you can already position yourself and make it seem like the outside is now middle to your chest and kind of confuse the batter that way. In Japan, they do crazy things back there where they're hopping and trying to like fool everybody else. Like they'll start inside and then last minute they'll hop outside for an outside pitch. And that to me is way too much movement. Like I don't even think my knees could handle doing something like that for 7 straight innings. But again, when you're playing all over the world and you're playing against different levels and different catchers, you do start to learn different things. And again, going back to how everybody's so unique, is you can always take little things from what you see and make it work for you. You don't have to perfectly look like somebody else. You don't have to, like, if just because there's a star catcher on your team and she catches this way doesn't mean that you have to do exactly that if that's just not what works for your body or what works for you. So just making sure you're like learning and getting each thing from people that you maybe idolize and saying like, oh, I can take that and put that in my toolbox, or I can do this and I can maybe adjust it to myself and see how that works for me. So just learning from other catchers is big for me.
Yeah, I think being set's so important. I mean, when I see some of the girls that are like stepping and catching, it's like, if that pitch is perfect, like you're going to be okay. But I mean, there's a pitch that like is literally over the white, that is 6 inches to the left of that is going to be very difficult to get. And, we talk about all the time, like, should an umpire be able to call, basically a zone without anything we're doing? Probably, but they don't. And so sometimes we get pitches that even go back over the middle and maybe they're just a little down and we catch them poorly and they're balls, because we, look like this trying to go back and get a ball. And, the umpire, like everybody in the stadium saw us, make this crazy move, and they're going to, just putting them in a bad position to call that a strike. And I think being set gives you that ability to, again, control more pitches in the middle of your body for sure.
Especially when you get crossed up. I think being crossed up happens so often that people don't really realize, but unfortunately pitchers can't be perfect all the time, just like catchers can't be perfect all the time. But going into catching bullpens and how important it is to catch bullpens and really understand your pitchers, you also tend to start to understand what pitches will she usually cross me up with if it gets later in the game, or when she's fatigued, what's a pitch that I have to expect can also go inside
that's too much. You need pitch comm.
What's that?
In the big leagues, you've seen like the catchers and they have like their shin guard here and they're like doing this. I don't know if have you ever seen it? There's a thing and they hit the thing and there's a thing in the hat of the pitcher that relays the pitch.
Oh, wow.
You got to look it up. They're not like super expensive either. Like it's something that you guys could get. And then
I didn't know that.
There's been, I think it's like multiple reasons, but like wild pitches went down once PitchCom came in. Wild pitches went down like drastically. And I think it was a combination of knee down stances, because I think guys are actually getting better at blocking in a knee down than they are on 2 feet. But there were definitely PitchCom, I think definitely had something to do with it, because the amount of wild pitches that are just, I called a slider and it was a 98 mile an hour fastball, like we had zero chance of catching it. Right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it relays very easily. There's like zero confusion and zero getting crossed up. And then it just takes away from the, you're not concerned about, oh, we got to change signs now because I think, the runner on second's got him, or like somebody's peeking in, or like change the sequence or anything. Like, yeah, I'll send you a link to it after.
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. I'd love to look into that.
Yeah. It's made a big difference and great for pace too. Right. I mean, how many pitchers are like, they got to be on their tempo of how they pitch. And then, all of a sudden it's like you missed and they shake because they didn't get the sequence or they forgot, and you're like, hang on, and you got to remind them, and then you go back. And so keeping the pitchers on their rhythm, huge for that too. Mm-hmm. So you definitely check that out.
Oh yeah.
So moving a little bit to the throwing, talk a little bit about throwing. Obviously in softball, we can do way more throwing on our knees. So give me a little bit of an idea of what you're doing, kind of overall philosophy of how your body's moving to throw, and then what you're doing to work on it.
So my biggest philosophy on whether I'm throwing from my feet or from my knees is just based on where the pitch is and what type of pitch it is. Obviously, if it's in the lower part of the zone, drop balls, change ups, anything maybe quad to knee height of the batter, I tend to go from my knees. It's just quicker that way. If anything makes my body kind of move up to go receive, or my glove have to move up, is when I tend to be faster on my feet. So just understanding that, again, that comes with understanding your body and what works for you. But working on throwing, I think the biggest thing that anybody can work on is just being consistent and hitting your spot. I think especially if you don't have the strongest arm, I don't think you have to have the strongest arm to be the best catcher. You just have to be able to hit your spot and make sure that you're hitting that glove every single time, or you're hitting that corner of the bag every single time. And I think what makes a catcher a solid catcher is someone that is quick on their feet, so having a quick pop time, but then being consistent with it. And I think where I've struggled with my career, it's something that I'm still working on and trying to be more consistent with, is I have a very strong arm, and I know my ball can get there and beat the runners 99% of the time, but my consistency lacks sometimes, where I'm like, my ball's curving or my ball's dropping, or I'm hitting the wrong side of the bag. And so even though my timing's spot on and I'm ahead of all the runners and I'm getting the ball there quickly, because I'm maybe crossing up the infielders or just not hitting my spot consistently every single time, it then makes the runners either safe or barely out if that happens. So for me, the biggest thing I like to work on is, how can I keep my feet fast? So whether I'm throwing on my feet or my knees, how can I keep my movement fast, but still make sure that I'm not overdoing it with my throw, and I'm finding kind of that percent where maybe I'm throwing, instead of throwing 100% every single time, I can drop it down to 90%, but make sure that I'm more consistent. Because sometimes when I'm throwing 100% or I'm trying to gun somebody out, that's when I get the wilder throws on my end. So just understanding is, okay, Erika, you can tone it down a little bit. You're still getting the ball fast enough to the infield, but at least you're hitting that side of the plate, or you're hitting their glove every single time, and they can make the out. So kind of understanding what works for you. And if you don't have a strong pop time, or you have a slower pop time, making sure is, how can I be more effective and cut down the space between me and throwing the second. So whether that's like moving your body forward more or be more explosive out, so that I can cut the distance and then make sure that my ball is getting there on time.
I think the big thing about throwing is this is by far the most like adrenaline packed play in the game. It's the only action that happens, not at contact of the bat, right? Like everything else is like, the shortstop doesn't have a play that anything. It's like, you just, okay, ball, hit the bat. I see the ball. I see the action. And we get that runner call, which is like mid action of the pitch. And so our adrenaline's going to kick us up. Like, we're going to throw this thing hard. We're going to do it aggressively. So we talk a lot about practicing at a slower pace. Can we practice at 75, 80%, feel our body move the right way and control that to the point that, like, when that runner call comes, like, I'm going to have no problem, kicking it up to 100%. Problem, I feel like, is we get catchers that are practicing at 100%, and then adrenaline kicks them up to 125%. And that's like you're talking about, when you're like trying to like really go too much, is when we start to lose control of that thing. I think like infielders give us the perfect example of like, understand, control your body. Like, I know you played a little infield too. It's the idea of like understanding the control of your body so that you know when you need to get it out and just get it airborne, and when you have time to really let it rip. Just like a third baseman, like clean ground ball. Okay, I can take a shuffle and throw, or boom, I got to get it out and have that kind of internal clock that tells us when we have to throw this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And like that, I feel like everything I'm saying is always going to come back to understanding your body and understanding what works for you. My 80% might not be what your 80% looks like, but what can we figure out is, what is my controlled movement? How can I be consistent with my controlled movement at that speed, so that I know that when the adrenaline does hit, it's maybe that extra 5% that can help me get that ball there, but it's not taking me over the top. Because again, like you said, if I'm going 100% every single time, when adrenaline kicks, I'll be at 110, and that's when you start seeing the crazy throws. But I think also with softball, I don't, again, I've never caught in a baseball game, so I don't know what it's like to see a baseball steal. But I, from watching, I do feel like baseball maybe leaves earlier, a little bit earlier than softball, if
Yeah.
I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yeah. They
And
can leave
so,
on the movement of the leg, as opposed
okay,
to softball. We got to wait till the release of the pitch.
yeah. So maybe in baseball, it's like you see that runner going and you're already like anticipating, like, okay, I have to wait for this ball to come. Like you have to control your adrenaline there, wait for the ball to come to then throw and not try to like jump the gun. Rather than
Mm-hmm.
in softball, it's more of practicing the reaction from the corner of your eye because you're still focusing on the pitch, because if they don't steal, you still have to make that catch and get that strike called. But as the pitch is coming to you in that split second, you also have to trust your eyes and see, like, okay, I'm seeing movement. Am I ready to throw to second? And I think the biggest thing to practice with that is, if you're a catcher, just getting in the field, having a runner, and you catching pitchers, but then in the meantime, at random times, this runner's going. And so you have to start to understand is, okay, I need to be in my ready stance at all times when there's runners on, but I also need to be ready and understand when can I be ready and when can I catch the pitch and stick it to get a strike. Because sometimes, especially what's happened to me and probably a lot of other catchers, is when you're anticipating a steal but they don't steal, and then you're like catching it but kind of falling forward
Yeah.
because you were anticipating the throw.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you don't want to happen. So I think always practicing kind of those situations where the runner might go, the runner might not, you have to be ready and react and just try to react as fast as you can. Because softball, I feel like, again, the diameter is so small. It's like it's a quicker, higher speed game, and the steal happens so fast
Mm-hmm.
that you have to just be able to react and throw. And in order to do that, you have to trust your throw. Because if you're a catcher that doesn't trust their throw or doesn't trust their consistency, then you might overthink that situation and then you slow yourself down to try to get that ball there. But if you can trust that you have a good throw and you can trust the work that you've put in on your throw, then all that you need to rely on is just, am I reacting fast enough? Am I seeing it from the corner of my eye fast enough so that I can make my throw happen?
I love it. Talk a little bit about your hands in that, like your transfer and what you're doing to work with that, and how quickly we want the ball in our hand.
As fast as possible. I think transfer time is so important, and I think is what kind of gets your momentum to then having a faster pop time. I think a lot of times I see catchers catch and then drop their hand into kind of like a loop to their ear. And I've always been taught, and what I always teach is, you want to be, how fast can I be from the moment I catch to get the ball to my ear? So it's the transfer from glove to hand without dropping the ball in your hand, or without kind of finding the loophole to get it here. Because I see a lot of times, especially me growing up, I was always that catcher that would catch it, drop it into my hands, and then move it up to my ear. And it went well, but when it did it, you could tell that like I would just bobble the ball because I'm just kind of like trusting that it falls into my hand. But just working on transfer drills and with a flat glove, if you guys have those paddle gloves,
Mm-hmm.
working on just being quick, kind of like what infielders do, just being quick on feeling the ball and grabbing it from the glove and just making this movement happen, muscle memory with that movement, and then making sure that you're quick to your ear. I think is the biggest thing, is how fast can I get from glove to ear while also moving in a forward direction.
Awesome. Dive into some blocking and kind of your thoughts on just, again, we just kind of start with like, and you've said this a million times, I love how you keep saying it, but kind of how your body works to get you to the most efficient places to block.
I'm going to be honest. As a catcher, I was the worst blocker. I am just now being comfortable with blocking and feeling better at it. But in college, my coaches would get so mad at me because I was just, it wasn't, blocking was not natural to me. I just wanted to pick. I was a picker. I had fast hands and I could pick, but obviously you can't pick every single pitch. So then I would get kind of stuck in the in between. But blocking just wasn't something I enjoyed, and it wasn't something that I was really good at. And I kept getting away with picking until I got to the pro league. And then in the pro league, you have fast runners, you have pitchers that are spinning the ball even more, and you have to block. You have to block at that point. And so now I'm starting to get more comfortable with blocking and just the movement that works for me. And for me, it's more so just kind of falling forward and absorbing the ball. I don't like the whole softball. I feel like we've always been taught where you have to kind of jump back and replace your knees, if that movement makes sense. But we were always, at least in college, I was always taught like blocking it. It's like a jumping back to then absorb the ball. But now I've felt just more comfortable with anticipating a pitch that's going to be on the ground and just kind of meeting it by falling forward.
Love that.
Thankfully, at the level that I'm at, the pitchers also get to be at a more elite level, and they do have way more control of their pitches. So you do start to understand what, like, you now can understand this pitch is definitely going to go in the dirt, this pitch isn't, rather than I feel like in college when pitchers are still kind of figuring out their pitches and trying to like work on maybe some new pitches. Any pitch could really go in the dirt at that point. But like at the pro level, I think you start to understand, okay, drop balls for sure, this ball is going to go in the dirt, or this pitcher's changeup 80% of the time will probably drop in front of me before, and I have to block, especially with runners on. But yeah, I like to just kind of meet it forward and just absorb it, and then I trust myself, and I know I'm quick enough to then get up and throw. But for me, I also only block when there's runners on. I tend to stick to my picking if there's no runners on, and just I feel quicker that way.
I will tell you, probably my biggest pet peeve in all of catching is when coaches are yelling at my catchers for not blocking balls with nobody on base. It's the biggest joke in the world. Like, I'm like, it's like, they'll be like, oh, I didn't block great. I'm like, oh, like some guys moving up. Like, no, it's just like nobody on base. I wasn't blocking. I'm like, what does that matter? And they're like, well, my coach is just like yelling at me. I'm like, well, like we literally don't have to block with nobody on base. So like, why would we spend any energy on that? Number one, but B, like you're taking away from your receiving, which is your number one priority there. So drives me nuts. Definitely picking balls whenever you don't need to, don't matter. But I love how you're talking about meeting the ball, and we talk about like compressing to the ground, right? And feeling more our hips sink in the direction that we're going to block. Because if I'm, that kick out, that old like replace the feet with your knees is like, we're literally going in the opposite direction. I'm moving up to go down. And then when I get catchers that come in and they start kicking out, I'm like, if you and I were going to go race right now, like you and I, we're racing to the end of the cage. Like, would you take a step backwards to then go and try to beat me there? Like, that's literally what we're doing. We're going in the opposite direction of where we need to go to get down there. And we have zero adjustability. Once we kick out, like the minute I leave the ground, wherever I land, that's where I'm at. And now my accuracy is compromised. And I think another underrated piece is that, the accuracy of our blocking is what keeps the ball close to us. And we obviously want to be soft and create that, soft structure of our upper body. But the reality is when the ball hits in the middle of our chest protector, it's got a better chance of keeping it close. And so when I can have my feet connected to the ground longer and feel like I'm compressing in that direction, well, now it's like, okay, I got more information on the ball and I've got more adjustability to go, it's there. No, I can push a little further if I needed to get more centered on it. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because softball, very big. Most girls that come in immediately got to fix that because they all want to go jump. I mean, they're jumping like 6 inches off the freaking ground. Their knees are getting as they go into these,
And that goes back to, like you said, softball being more traditional, and that's just always something we've been taught. And I remember that was being taught from the moment I started playing, was always this jump back. And I think that's really why I didn't like it. It was just too much movement. I'm like, why am I catching's already hard? Why are you adding this to my legs and my knees? And so I really hated catching. That's what got me into picking, or hated blocking. That's what got me into picking. But now that I've understood a better movement of like, I can just fall forward. If I know, if I'm in the right position, and I feel more comfortable when I'm in kind of a mid squat, so my butt's a little bit elevated. If I'm in that position and I know a drop ball or a changeup or whatever pitch is coming, and I have to be ready for it to go on the ground, I can just, once I see that down angle on that ball and I can anticipate that it's going to hit the ground, I can just fall forward and meet it in my chest. And I think that's helped so much with me just being more comfortable with blocking, but then also understanding that in that position, I can also understand is, do I need to block this or can I still pick it? that obviously can't be for everybody. You have to be really comfortable with your picking, but there's some that it's like, if it's about to bounce super close to you, I'd rather just pick that and I'd be faster on my feet. But if it's a ball that might be bouncing way ahead of time or has a different spin to it, obviously I would have to block it and try to get my shoulders around it as well, just to get that bad hop. But yeah, that's still a work in progress for me. Is just, that's, I think, in all of my catching, the one thing I maybe have to be really consistent on when I am practicing catching is blocking, and just making sure that I'm constantly doing that movement so that it comes natural to me in a game, and it's not something that I have to really think about. It's just a reaction. And there are some moments where I'm still maybe thinking too much about it, and I want to become more of a catcher that's like, the minute I see down spin, I react and I can block it. But that's going to come with practice, and that's going to come with being more comfortable. I do remember in college a drill that my college coach would do to me to get me used to just being hit by the ball and not be scared of it, because a lot of the times I'd block and start flinching. Is I would just have to be in my block position, and he would just throw really hard balls, bouncing them into my chest protector and sometimes into my face mask, into my shoulders, just making sure that I understood the feeling of what it was like if the ball did hit me there, and that I was going to be fine and I didn't have to flinch. Because the more you flinch, the more you get rigid as a catcher when you're blocking. That's when you're closing your space and making the zone smaller for where the ball can hit off of you, and then you're just becoming hard as a rock. And when you become hard as a rock, that's when the ball starts to kind of bounce 10 feet in front of you, rather than having it still stay 5 feet or really close to you to be able to react.
And every time we introduce blocking, I always ask the students, I'm like, do you like blocking? And like, literally, like there's the kind of like 20% that are like, oh yeah, like those like crazy kind of like, wacko catchers like we are at times, that are like, yeah, I love it. And then almost every one of them say no. And I'm like, well, it's just because you don't know how. Like, if you don't know how to block, like everything else is in the way. Like, there's zero natural tendency of a human body to just want to sit there and allow something to hit us. Like, nothing natural in us. Like, we're literally built to defend ourselves. And so we have all these movements that want to defend ourselves. So once they kind of feel like what it feels like to get into good positions, and they feel the ball off the chest, I mean, it's such a gratifying feeling once you get the hang of it. It's like an addicting feeling of like wanting to do it. But it's just understanding, again, with, broken record theme of this podcast is understanding your body and how it moves, and, getting you to those positions that allow you to do that. Have you at all messed with one knee down and blocking?
I haven't. And one of my Italian teammates, catcher, she tends to be knee down most of the time. But I haven't understood how to go from knee down to blocking. But I would have just assumed that if your knee's down, all you have to do is kind of just get your other knee down and meet it.
So
but
the reality of blocking, like, and this is why I have the same conversation every time. I say, what's the goal to blocking? And every single student says, keep the ball in front of you. I'm like, no. Why are you trying to keep the ball in front of you? Like, well, like, I want to make sure the runner doesn't move up. Okay, so the goal is that the runner doesn't move up. So if we can kind of change the mindset of that, this is why, you're a perfect example of this, because we just have this idea of like what it should look like. And then you're saying, well, no, sometimes like picking the ball is better, right? Like if it's close to me, well, like, yeah, because the ball's in your glove. Like, all it takes for a runner to not go on a ball in dirt is to hesitate for a split second. They don't hesitate and then keep going. They hesitate and they retreat back, right? So the minute they might even see down spin and like try to get an early break on a ball in the dirt, and you pick it and it's in your glove, they're done. They're not going anywhere. Now you block that thing perfectly, lands right in front of you, but they got a good read on it. You still might not have a chance to keep them from moving up, right? So the knee down now just gives us more of the ability. Again, we're already essentially at the height that our chest protector needs to be to block, right? If we're knee down, our chest protector is the same height as two knees on the ground to block. So now you're essentially already at the height. There is no movement down or up. So now it's just the idea of being able to figure out how to move laterally, which is, not as difficult as it seems. And then there's just the idea of like, if I'm already halfway on the ground, it doesn't need to be two knees get to the ground. A lot of times with a knee down, it's just slightly moving right or left. And I'm left knee down, my right knee down might just stay up and my glove goes down. But now I'm legitimately absorbing this because there's zero movement. That's why the kick out and everything we talked about, like that creates a collision with this ball. Like I'm kicking out, I'm trying to get over the top of this thing, and this ball's coming and we got this collision. And now I'm knee down and I just decide, okay, I'm here. I get a little chest press forward, which helps me receive. And then I'm already there. All I got to do is turn my glove over. Now I'm legitimately just allowing this ball to hit me softly. And so the most advantageous piece is I now get to see this thing way later without having to like really like absorb like kick to get down to a position to absorb the ball. I'm now seeing the ball more. I have more information on the ball. So I'm making better decisions between the receive block, but I'm also more accurate in my blocking because I now know exactly where this ball is. I move exactly to the middle of it. I keep that thing nice and close to me. So kind of like the other piece of it that I think is massively important, which I think you would benefit from a ton, is if I'm connected to the ground better in a knee down, like I have more reach to catch balls. So I start doing some drills when I put them on a knee, and like balls that they were blocking, they're literally just reaching out and catching because they have more of a connection to the ground. And then as you say, like you have great hands. Like if I'm more connected to the ground and I'm feeling this move to receive anyways, I'm just picking balls. And not the idea of like on 2 feet, butt up, and then I'm kind of like trying to sink down and still make this pick becomes more difficult. I'm now more like a first baseman who like plants the left foot on the ground and gets down in the dirt and goes and rips a pick as opposed to like a defensive pick. So there's my long-winded rant on blocking with a knee down there.
Yeah, no, I definitely need to try that because, like I said, picking is so natural to me. And so when I do have that knee down already on some pitches, I've already felt that part where I can get my body around pitches better by having my knee down, maybe with my flexibility, my mobility, whatever it is. I feel like I can move better with my knee down. So now understanding is, can I also be quicker with my blocking, or can I also take away more blocking and get me to pick more pitches? I'll definitely have to mess around with that
For sure.
in my practices now, because that's definitely interesting to me.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm
again,
surprised it's not talked about in softball more, because I know the knee down is still a very like taboo thing in softball. It's like, why is your knee down? That looks weird. That looks so different. This isn't baseball. Like, softball is always like, we're not baseball.
but why?
And so
Why is that? Explain it to me.
I don't
Because
know. And
it's the same premise. Like there's obviously differences, don't get me wrong, but it's the same premise of a game, right?
exactly. And that's something I've always kind of had to fight against, because my swing has always been a baseball swing. And so everyone was always against me and my swing and my style of swing, because it's like, how are you going to get to rise balls? How are you going to get to rise? It was always the question. It's like, you have such a baseball swing, but baseball players aren't, like, they don't see rise balls. So how are you going to get to a rise ball with that type of swing? And it's like, now you're starting to see softball adjust and understand that it, like, that is the swing. That a baseball swing and a softball swing is very similar, but because softball, like you said, is very traditional, it takes them longer to realize and adapt to the new changes. And so just now you're starting to see more baseball swings in softball. And so it's like the knee down as a catcher is still very like new. It's like, okay, maybe give it a couple more years and you'll start to see more softball catchers adjust to that. But
Be the change.
I know I'm always usually, I'm like, whatever, if it works, if it gets me out of blocking, I'll do it. But yeah,
No,
I don't know why softball's like that.
And here's the thing, we have like, over 100 catchers in here on a regular basis. And I would say, I probably have 20 to 25 girls. The girls, with what's going on in the game, number one, like we know, like there's hands down, I don't think anybody can argue anymore that we receive better on a knee, right? We just have a better connection to the ground. We have a better understanding of clearing space with our body. You talked about it on this pitch, how it helped you clear some space to be able to make that pitch a strike. It's just the idea that in softball, unlike baseball, there's less movement with depth. So you have like the drop curve is kind of like, a pitch that will have a little bit of like lateral movement with some depth. But a lot of times it's the curve is really more like just lateral movement, and the rise is just vertical movement, and the drop is just vertical movement, right? So the reality is like, and answer this question for me, like how many blocks do you have that are really like outside the white lines? I mean, how many like really wild? I know you're at a level where pitchers are very good, but the idea is like, do you get a lot of blocks that even take you that far?
No, not really. And if I do, that's more of like you get into that whole mindset of like do whatever you need to do to stop the ball. So you're just kind of like
Yeah. Glove
moving
it,
side to
pick it.
side at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're right. When you're actually doing a physical block, it's very much in the white lines.
So I'm already halfway down the block. I really can just focus on everything inside the white lines. I've become you'd be amazed if you just get into your knee down stance and just start blocking, how easily you'll block balls, especially inside your frame, but how much they're going to be softer coming off of your body. But then the last piece that's more advantageous for softball is like we get to throw on our knees. I mean, like, so again, like teaching girls to throw from the knee down, it's a little tougher left knee than right knee. But the reality is like we get the advantage of almost always throwing on our knees. So again, if we're doing an action on our knees, like why wouldn't we just start there if we can do everything we need to do, right? It kind of goes back to like the idea of like we used to see a lot of catchers, like they'll like drop their knee as they receive the pitch. It's like, well, if you wanted to get your knee down to clear space to receive that pitch, why wouldn't you just start there to have that space and limit the movement down into that?
Yeah, so I guess my question for the knee down would be, how would you go from knee down to throw from your knee? Like, what would the movement look like?
So everything in the throwing has to start with the engagement of the hip, the right hip, right? So just like when you're hitting, I'm sure you talk a lot about like the coil and feeling like your right hip engage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that has to happen in the throw. Too much of throwing on the knees in softball and baseball has been taught on the idea of like feeling the need to gain ground. But the reality of throwing is that it's linear in that we step, but it's completely rotational. So just like hitting is linear in that we stride and we'll move to stride. But once that front foot hits the ground, like we're not going forward anymore, right? So on a lot of occasions, we actually kind of will feel ourselves go the opposite direction of like getting behind the ball. So with throwing being rotational, if I'm moving forward where there's really no need for the linear movement because I'm not on my feet, all I'm doing is getting outside that hip and getting this way. And that's where like girls are really starting to like pull down on those throws. But the reality is this can be completely rotational. Like we could literally stay in a barrel. So left knee down again becomes a little tougher. We almost have to feel like the load into the right hip is like backwards into that hip. And the reality is getting our shoulders turned is all that we need, because rotation again happens in the center of our body. So as long as I create that coil in the center of my body, it's going to uncoil and go. But right knee down, it's like massively easy. Like it's crazy when I get girls right knee down and they start to throw from a knee, because like if this is left knee and this is right knee and I just swap them. So like my right knee goes up into the air as I put my left knee down. Like now my right hip's engaged. It's very easy for me to turn my shoulders and then I can just rip. So it's really more staying in a smaller space. But all the mechanics aside, like you know your body and you know like how athletic you are. Like I always tell people like they figure the receiving and blocking very well on the knee down, and then everybody kind of goes, well, what about throwing? And my advice is always like, just do it. Like my advice to you is like jump into your knee down stances and just start throwing and see what happens, right? Because a lot of times we get too mechanical in figuring out how we want to do it. And like, again, someone like you that's, over and over talked about like understanding your body and what works for you is like, man, just get out on a field and get in your left knee down stance and be like, all right, I'm going to try to throw to second. I'm going to try to throw to first and mess around with one knee down. But the reality becomes that, especially from our knees, our throwing is really only in the upper body. Like it's really just getting into that shoulder turn and getting into that right hip, that it just uncoils at that point, just like you do when you're hitting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
that's definitely, I'm going to have to, just figure it out.
Yeah, that's
my body can get into that position. I know that.
For sure. And that's the thing is like, I think you just, start. The biggest key is that we don't move forward. Anytime we move forward, we lose engagement of the right hip. And that's just like if you were hitting and you started to lunge to the ball, you'd lose engagement of the right hip. And when we lose engagement of the right hip, we're no longer level. Like our body's not level because I've tilted, and rotation needs to happen around an axis, which is our spine. And so now our axis has tilted, and only way to rotate would be like straight into the ground. So that's when I just start pulling to try to find the release point as it gets out in front of me.
Yeah, totally
So,
makes sense.
so definitely, I highly recommend messing around with that, because I think once you start to see receive block, I mean, like I'm telling you, you're gonna feel like the pitcher moved back 5 feet. Like you have like that much more time to make decisions when it goes from like, I'm going to either receive this pitch or I'm just going to turn my glove over to block it. That's like the only, not, I got to receive it this way, kick out, sink down, however we do it. Like there's just too much that can go wrong and all that. So now all the stuff that happens where there needs to be more time, decisions have to be made earlier. If my swing is long, I got to make a decision if I'm swinging earlier. Oh, it was a drop. Dang, swung over the top of it. My swing short. Now I go, nope, take, because I was able to see that thing longer. And it's the same idea for us behind the plate.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna mess around with it because I feel like it can't hurt me. It really can't make it worse. So
no, I think you'll be very surprised, and I'm excited to hear
yeah.
hear the results of that as you do it. So, all right, we nerded out on catching a bunch. I got a few questions for you personally on some of the things you've done. Number one, I think you're the first Olympian we've ever had on the podcast.
Oh, nice.
So
I'm honored.
Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Wow. It's still hard for me to kind of wrap my brain around being an Olympian. I think it could be because of the time period that we were at, but it being COVID times and then going to an Olympics kind of changes the whole experience. So I think because I was so set on how my mom was explaining to me what her experience was like, to then having my own experience with no fans, no ceremony, kind of like a very different type of Olympics, is like I still sometimes have to like pinch myself and remind me like, okay, you are an Olympian, you did go to the Olympics, even though it might not feel like it happened, because I feel like from 2020 to 2022, everything just kind of like we blinked and it was gone. But yeah, it's definitely a dream come true for me. I think I've always wanted to play at the very highest level, and I think being an Olympian is exactly that. Like you're that 1%. And so sometimes when I think back of my experience of being in the same space as Usain Bolt or Simone Biles or Federica Pellegrini, like all these Italian stars that you see, and it's like I was in the cafeteria with them, or I was literally in the same village, like I could walk past them and we were competing for the same thing. So I think that's when I get the goosebumps, and that's when I really am like, wow, like I did that. But when I think of like the actual softball side, it was so different because there were zero fans and you're playing your 5 games. You have to win them all. Like it's just like it's such a different experience, and it happens so quick that it's very hard to kind of like think back and be like, this, how did I feel during this game, or how did I feel during that? Because I just feel like it happened so fast. And it's more so the thing that really like reminds me is like, wow, like I'll look down at my tattoo sometimes just as a reminder of like, okay, like this wasn't a dream, it wasn't fake. Like I actually was there. I was in the Olympic Village. And I think now 2028 being in the picture, it's like, okay, now though I'm striving for like the actual Olympic experience. So like post COVID, like I want the whole experience of, I want the fans there, and I want to experience the opening ceremony, and I want to be able to like look around and see all these athletes without a face mask on, or see all these people and like actually be able to talk to them about their experiences. And I think what really got me into that was watching Paris. I think Paris was very like, it was very emotional and overwhelming watching it, because it was like we missed out on that, but we were there. So it's like I feel like everybody that was at the 2021 Olympics is kind of like in the same boat of like, we were there, but were we actually there? Like we did the Olympics, but did we actually experience the Olympics? Because then you see the opening ceremony of how it was in Paris, and you see like everybody's faces and the excitement, and then you look back to your experience and it's like face mask on, maybe 40% of athletes were doing the opening ceremony, and you're just kind of like in an enclosed space. So definitely a different experience, but nevertheless, very gratifying to think that I did make it to the highest level, even though sometimes I have to kind of remind myself.
Aren't they not doing softball in LA though?
Yeah, I heard so softball, the games I heard are actually going to be in Oklahoma City. But from my understanding is once the games start, you go to Oklahoma City, but the ceremony itself, we should be able to be in LA from my
Yeah.
understanding. Again, we're 4 years out, so it's not 3 years out. It's not really set in stone yet, but I'm hoping that
I hope they change
you
that.
get to experience the opening ceremony and
Yeah.
you experience everything and then maybe go to Oklahoma City for games. But
Yeah, I hope they change
I
that.
don't
I
know.
don't think they will,
Softball
but
always gets the short end of the stick sometimes. So it's like you
well,
have to be grateful that we're in the Olympics, but then it's like, oh, but we're in
no.
Oklahoma City.
Yeah,
So
it's like there's plenty of venues down there. Like, what are we talking about?
plenty
Like,
of venues.
like
Yeah.
it's crazy to me that they can't do that. But okay, so if you've never listened to the podcast, the last question we always ask, we call it baseball bites. In this version, we call it softball bites. Presented by Black Bear Diner. We ask everybody what is along their entire your softball journey, and your softball journey is very wide and international here. So the one place that kind of sticks out to you of a place to eat that you would recommend. So it could be like maybe something you grew up with, maybe something, you were just in Japan now, like that sticks out, something you were in McNeese, whatever it is, give me one place sticks out to you.
Is this like things I would eat
Just
pre-game or just in
one,
general?
one restaurant or place that you have gone or you regularly go that is your go-to, highly recommended. I want to put this like map together eventually once we have like enough of, and I'm going to just have all these, places of to eat in this kind of like baseball, softball world.
So there's so many restaurants, but I think the first place that comes to mind is in Japan. We're based out of a little city outside of Kyoto, and we always go to this every off day we have. It's me and my other three foreigner teammates, and we always just meet up for like a late brunch on our off day called Kona's Coffee, and it's like the Japanese Hawaiian style to pancakes, and they just make the Japanese fluffy pancakes
Mm-hmm.
that are like this thick. They just
Yep.
make like stacks of those, and the way the whipped cream and the way they serve it and the coffee is like that's the kind of like our feel good, like okay, we got through the week, let's reset and go to the next week. And we always do that with pancakes. So that's like my first place, but obviously Italy is very high up on the list. Every restaurant in Italy is my go-to, but I think yeah, Kono's Coffee.
How often do you get back to Italy?
I mean I was just there for 2 weeks for Christmas, so my
Awesome.
whole family is in Italy, so I try to go as much as I can, but usually with at least once or twice a year for national team purposes. But then I do try to stick in a little vacation in there and actually get to see my family. But I don't know, Italy is it's like my dream location. I would love to go back and just kind of live there in the future. So I feel like every year I'm like staying longer and longer in Italy just because I love it so much. So
I think that it's everybody's dream of
yeah,
where I live. Just me and my wife went on our honeymoon there this summer, and I will tell you, I'm not a big traveler either. Like I never really have traveled. Kind of gives me anxiety. We were going for 2 weeks. I was like crazy anxious on the plane. I'm like, man, what am I doing? I'm leaving my business for 2 weeks, and all this. And the minute I got there, I didn't have a care in the world. I didn't want to come home.
right.
I mean, it was
And you were
just
in
incredible.
Tuscany too. Like Tuscany is the dream location. That's kind of like
So we did, we went to the Amalfi Coast. We started in, then we went to Rome, and we stayed outside of Siena. We stayed at this resort in Tuscany, and like just, I mean, insane. And then we went to Florence, which I think was by far the highlight of the trip. I love Florence. That was like amazing to me.
what resort did you stay at?
It was called Borgo Scopetto.
Was it like little villa houses on a hill?
No, it's this big old, like like everything's stone, built forever ago, you know, built in like 1100. It's a winery.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, we literally like, we didn't do, and it was cool because we just come back from Rome where we were like hustle to try to see
So hectic,
everything,
yeah.
you know? And then we just got there and it was like, we didn't leave. They had wine tasting on the, you know, on the property. So it was like, we just woke up, hung by the pool, had an Aperol spritz at the pool.
Oh yeah.
Like, and went in, did wine tasting, like literally like this sommelier there was phenomenal. And like, we just were by ourselves talking wine. He was our waiter every night at dinner. So then it was like, we'd eat dinner. They'd have these like 4-course tasting menus. And like, he's just given us like the perfect wines that pair with everything. Oh my God. It was like the most incredible experience.
Do you plan to go back?
Yes,
Hopefully.
for sure. I'm with you. Honestly, my retirement gig, I want to go coach out there. I want to spend like 6 months out there and coach baseball or softball, you know, anything going on out there, and just kind of really be immersed more in the culture than feeling like I'm hustling and trying to see everything.
Yeah, you should really even look into or see how it would work is even just having an academy in Italy. Because I know like now Italy, softball and baseball in Italy is still very behind, but I think they're starting to really get into the same work ethic of like, okay, I don't know if it's because there's more Italians now overseas, like showing that you can do something with this sport. And so I think now they're getting used to like, okay, I do have to put the work in. Like now they're asking for more help or they're asking to go get coached or getting lessons. Like I remember growing up and softball and baseball was any sport really besides basketball, soccer, and volleyball, which are the 3 main sports in Italy. But every other sport is very much so a hobby. Like you go to school, you go to work, and then if you have time, you dedicate 2 hours twice a week to this sport. And I think that's like mentality because all their practices are always after work, after like it's from like 8 to 10 p.m. It's always at night. So it's always like that mindset of like, it's just a hobby. Like I don't really have to work for it. But now it's becoming like, okay, people are asking for academies and they're asking for like legit softball, baseball training and weightlifting. And so it's like the world of baseball and softball is growing very much now in Italy, where I think in the future there's going to be a lot of opportunities to get into high level coaching out there.
Yeah, and I've had opportunities. People have reached out to me to coach, you know, just like professional teams in Italy. And then I have a buddy that coaches a team in south of France, and and I'm like, every time I'm like, man, if I could leave for 6 months and go do it, I would 100% do it. So I'm planning on that as my retirement gig, you know, go do that for a couple of years and live that.
Living the life.
Oh, tell me about it. Well, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you coming on. That was awesome to chop it up, and wish you the best of luck this year.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll have a new episode for you every single Tuesday here on our YouTube channel and wherever you listen to podcasts.